Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next event in our virtual author visit series at the Westbury Memorial Public Library. I am Michelle Marcus, reference librarian and your host today. Just to let you know, I will start by having all the attendees on mute, so let me do that now so I don't forget. Let's see. Can everyone do that yourself? I can't remember where it is on here. Oh, I think you know. Got it. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So it looks like we're good now. Okay. So as I said, everyone will be on mute. And then when we get to the question and answer portion, then if you want, you can raise your hand, I'll take you off mute and you can ask your question. But if you prefer, you can also just ask your question in the chat and I can ask it for you. And I'm excited to speak to author Sadeqa Johnson, and let me share a little bit more about her. She is a former public relations manager, spent several years working with well-known authors such as J.K. Rowling, B.B. Moore Campbell, Amy Tan, and Bishop T.D. Jakes before becoming an author herself. She is a New York Times best-selling author of 5 novels and the recipient of the National Book Club Award, the Phyllis Wheatley Award, and the USA Best Book Award for Best Fiction. Her most recent novel, The House of Eve, was an instant New York Times bestseller and was selected by Reese's Book Club as a February 2023 pick. Her previous novel, Yellow Wife, also received numerous awards and accolades. Sadeqa's novels have received starred reviews from Kirkus and Library Journal and have been featured in top read lists in several notable publications. She teaches for the MFA program at Drexel University and is a writing mentor for Story Summit. Originally from Philadelphia, she currently lives near Richmond, Virginia with her husband and 3 children. Sadeqa, thank you so much for agreeing to do this virtual author visit with the Westbury Memorial Public Library. I'm so excited to discuss your latest book, The House of Eve, and congratulations on making the New York Times bestseller list. I read and loved this book. Could you briefly just tell us a little bit what your book is about? Spoiler free, of course, to let our viewers who haven't read the book yet, a little introduction to the book.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you all for showing up. I know that you could be doing anything on a Wednesday evening. So I'm really feeling quite special that you guys chose to spend this time with me talking about the House of Eve. The House of Eve is the story of Ruby Pearsall. The story starts with her being a 15-year-old girl, living somewhat impoverished with the dream of becoming an ophthalmologist. She has very little resources, but there is a program that she could be a part of that could absolutely change her life. She meets a young Jewish boy named Shimmy, and they have a relationship that is frowned upon, and it upends a lot of things that she has planned for herself. Meanwhile, Eleanor is a woman who's from Ohio, and she ends up in Washington, D.C. at Howard University. There she meets the dashing and handsome William Pride, who is one of the most affluent and well-connected men at Howard University. His family knows everyone, but there's only certain people that this family want to associate with, and Eleanor is not one of them. And so we have epic love stories. We have impossible choices that women have had to make throughout history. There is maternity homes and at the center of the story, but it's really about the impossible choices that young women had to make in the 1950s and how they see themselves getting to the next side.
Very good. Thank you. And as I like, and I'm sure our readers also like to do as well, is go a little deeper into the book. And I was wondering if you could please share a little more of us about the themes of this book.
So the House of Eve started with the idea of a young girl. I mean, Ruby was the first character that came to my mind. And I was thinking about stories that my grandmother told me. My grandmother told me that she found herself pregnant at age 14, and she had my mom at 15. She was unmarried. It was the 1950s. She lived in Philadelphia, and good girls didn't do this. And so there was a lot of shame and secrecy around the birth of my mother. My mother told me that she didn't know my grandmother was her mother until she was in the third grade, because up until that point, it was never openly discussed. And she was raised by her own grandmother. And growing up, I could always feel this tension between them. I knew that they loved each other, but there was this tension that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And it got me thinking about shame and secrecy and mothers and daughters and what we as women have had to endure over the centuries. And I wondered, what other opportunities did my grandmother have as a young girl in North Philadelphia when she found herself pregnant? What was available to her? And I went to the library. The library is one of my favorite places in the world. So this is a very special moment to be hanging out with you guys. And I found a book on maternity homes. I didn't know about maternity homes. And it was almost like, well, why is this sort of blotted from our history? Or why is this not something discussed? How come we don't know about this? I read a book by Ann Fessler called The Girls Who Went Away. And in the book, she interviewed 100 girls who had gone to maternity homes and the different experiences they had. Some girls were there because their parents sent them. Some girls had gone, because the parents of the boy sent them. So they had different reasons for getting there. Some of them wanted to keep their baby, some of them didn't. But in the stories, I could see that oftentimes these women were not treated kindly. They were told that they were the problem, that they were psychotic, that they were neurotic, that they were unfit to raise a child because they had had this baby out of wedlock. And the plan for these homes often were to separate the mother and child so that they could put the babies up for adoption and send the mother home as if it never happened. And I was really drawn to this story because I wondered if my grandmother had had that opportunity. One, would she have taken it? Two, would it have changed her life? And three, were opportunities like maternity homes available to her as a young Black woman living in Philadelphia? And so that was sort of the beginning nuggets of the story for me.
Very good. Also, I was going to ask, how did you get into writing historical fiction, and how did you go about doing research for this topic?
I was standing in my kitchen in Springfield, New Jersey in 2015, and I heard a voice that said, move. And it wasn't like move down the street because we were already looking for a new home. It was like move, like out of the state. This was February. I talked to my husband about it. 4 months later, we were moving into our new home in Central Virginia. There was no rhyme or reason for it. We weren't moving for a job, to be close to family, none of that. It was just this inclination that I had that we needed to do this. And 9 months later, we had some friends come down from New Jersey to visit, and someone suggested that we take a walk along the Richmond Slave Trail. I saw it as an opportunity to educate the kids. I didn't know a lot about Richmond, even though we had been here for 9 months. And so we did. And as we were walking the Richmond Slave Trail, there were different markers along the trail that talked about what it was like for the enslaved people as they came into Virginia, into Richmond specifically. Richmond being number 2 in the slave trading industry behind New Orleans, which was number 1. And we got to the marker that talked about the Lumpkins jail. And it was described as a punishing center and holding site for enslaved people. In fact, over a 20-year period, over 200,000 enslaved people passed through this particular jail. And at the time, I didn't even know that slave jails existed. Everything that I knew about slavery was It took place on a plantation, and there was a scary overseer, and that was sort of the extent of it. The owner of the jail, his name was Robert Lumpkin, and he was known as the devil. This was the devil's half acre. And he was known for his cruelty and extreme punishment of enslaved people. But on the market also said that he was married to a Black woman. Her name was Mary Lumpkin. And together they had 5 children. He treated them kind and considerate, is what it said. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, how is that even possible? And what would Mary's side of the story be? Because we know that enslaved women even during that time, didn't have much agency over their lives. And so what would she have said to that? And how was her life on a daily basis? And how did she protect her children? And those were the thoughts that was running through my head. And it was almost like the ancestors were waiting for me. I could feel this energy, this synergy, like I was in the right place at the right time, and there was a connection because they literally got in the car with me and followed me home because all I could think about was Mary Lumpkins and her story and her children. But I was afraid because my first 3 novels were contemporary fiction. I wrote about the things that I knew about. My first novel, Love in a Carry-On Bag, was a long distance love story. My husband and I started off long distance. My second novel, Second House from the Corner, was about a woman who got married with secrets, but she also was the stay-at-home mom with these little kids, and she was drowning in her skin. And that was me. I was home, I was drowning, I was trying to get my career off the ground. So I knew what that was like. And my third novel, And Then There Was Me, was a story that I had overheard. But this was the first time that a story sort of chose me, got under my skin, said that I needed to tell it. And I was terrified. And I remember one of my friends coming over to my house, and I'm telling her, the story that I discovered. And I said, but I'm so afraid. And she said, Sadeqa, the thing that scares you most is what you're supposed to be doing next. And that gave me permission to just give it a try. And I'm so glad that I did, because Yellow Wife was um, a wonderful tribute to Mary Lumpkin and to Richmond and to the enslaved people. And I was able to really tell the story that wasn't being told. I see myself now as a historical fiction writer, and that my job is to shine a light in dark spaces, and bring them to the surface so that we could examine them and learn from them and stop doing the things that we've always done and get new results.
What an amazing story how you decided to write Yellow Wife, and that was an amazing book as well. Also, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your writing process.
So I'm getting ready to go away to a writer's residency on Monday. I'll be gone for 2 weeks. So this has become my new process, is that I need to get out of my house for long periods of time so that I could focus on the writing without being distracted. So I'll be doing that on Monday for about 2 weeks, and hopefully really get a deep dive on this new novel that I'm working on. But on a daily basis, I try to write at least 5 hours a day, sometimes more, depending on how much distractions happen throughout the day. I write Monday through Friday. I usually give myself the weekends off. I think about writing on the weekends, but I don't usually write on the weekends. Yeah.
All right. Also, I was curious how you made the transition from your PR job to becoming a published author. Can you share a little bit more about that, please?
When I graduated from college, my first job out of college was at Scholastic Books. I was an assistant publicist, and I worked in the publicity department, and that's when I got to work with J.K. Rowling and so many other, Ruby Bridges and other children authors. But while I was there, I had always been a big reader, and I was a theater major for a little while in college, and then I switched to communications. And I read all the time. And I just remember feeling like, I could probably do this. So I started sketching a novel while at Scholastic that never saw the light of day. I was able to talk to editors and get feedback and, just try and figure out where I was going with it. And when I got to my second job, which was Putnam and Riverhead, it was there that I really started writing. And I realized that the reason why I had a job in publishing was so that when it was my turn to be the author, I would have been on both sides of the table. So I would know how to conduct business and what I needed to do for myself to push my career forward and my books forward. So I wrote at work, and it was back in the day where we took, town cars with our authors to the Today Show and Good Morning America. And I would pick their brains, sitting in the back of the car. What's your writing schedule like? Where do you get your ideas? How'd you find an agent? What advice would you give to budding writers? Things like that. And I stored that information. So when I got married, I was pretty well into Love in a Carry-On Bag, my first novel. And I was pretty confident that I had made enough friends in the business that I could quit my job, have my son, and become a published author. And so I did. I quit my job with my husband's blessing. We had our son, and I had an agent. My agent took my first book, Love in a Carry-On Bag, to market. She had 10 editors read through my book. 9 of them said no. And we got to the last editor at Touchstone Books who was interested in the book, but she needed to talk it over with her boss. And so my agent had called me on a Friday night. Now I started this journey and I had my son. By the time the agent is calling me with the news that we have a bite, I have 3 children. So that tells you how long this took. So I have 3 kids, it's pizza night. And she says, we'll call you back on Monday and let you know. So, Friday night, we're dancing in the kitchen. Mommy's about to sell her book. Everybody's excited. I'm excited. I could barely sleep all weekend. And then my agent calls me on Monday and she says, I'm so sorry. She's not going to be able to buy your book. Why don't we wait 6 months and see what happens? But as you can see, I went from no kids to married to 1 kid to 3 kids. So I didn't have 6 more months to wait. I've been waiting. And my husband and I had gone out to dinner because he was trying to cheer me up because I was very down in the dumps about this. And he said, what is it that you need to get this book off the ground? And I said, well, I need an editor. And he said, why don't we just hire an editor? And it was almost like, in that moment, everything just opened up. And the universe was waiting for me to say yes to publishing in a different way. And I did. And so I got all the things that I needed. I got an editor, a distribution deal. I was the sales manager. I would call up the local bookstores with an alias. My friends call me Dee, and my maiden name is Murray. So I would call the bookstores and say, hi, this is Dee Murray calling from 12th Street Press. I got this great book, Love in a Carry-On Bag. Can I send you a couple of copies to put on your shelf? And so for that whole first year and a half, we literally traveled up and down the East Coast, going to every book event, any place where I knew there were going to be people, because I knew that if I could get in front of the people and get my book in their hand, I could get them to buy the book. And so that's what we did. And eventually it caught steam. Love in a Carry-On Bag won the Phyllis Wheatley Award. And that gave me a little bit of notoriety. My editor on Love in a Carry-On Bag decided that she was going to change careers. And so I convinced her to be my agent. And we partnered up with another agency. And we took my second book, Second House from the Corner, to market. And this time I started thinking like, okay, I've done all this hard work. I really want to be able to choose who I get to work with. And so my agent took it to market again, and she called me on Monday and she said, we have 3 editors at major publishing houses that want to buy Second House from the Corner. Why don't we sit down and figure out who we want to work with?
Oh, I love that type of story and just how you took a different direction and you succeeded by taking a different route. Next I was going to ask, how did you tie the story together of the two main characters, Ruby and Eleanor? I love both characters and you really brought them to life in the story. And definitely characters you want to root for and cheer on.
I knew that at the center of the story there was going to be this thing, and since you said no spoilers, I want to honor that. But I knew at the center of the story that there was going to be this thing that would pull those two characters together. And it was important for me to really develop each character and give them a story. It was really like writing two books in one book to a degree until there was a way to braid them together. And what I would do is that I would write part one, all of Ruby's story, and then I would set it aside. And then I would write all of part one, Eleanor's story. And then I would look at them both. And I always think about it like hair, like braiding hair, that I would figure out where the entry point was to braid their two stories together so that it made sense to the reader, even though it was two separate stories kind of blending together.
Okay, next I was going to ask, do you relate to any of the main characters in this book?
I mean, I think all of the characters always have a little bit of me in them, be it small, but they all live inside of me. So they have to come through me to get to the page. So they all take a little bit of me with them.
Very good. I'm sure listeners, actually our viewers, I mean, including myself, would love to hear what you're currently reading. Can you please share a few titles?
Yes, I just finished Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, which I loved. I just read Lisa C's new book. I can't ever remember the title. The Lady Tan Circle of Lady Tan's
Circle of Women.
Circle of Women, maybe. Yes, yes. And then I just read another book called Behold the Dreamers. And I'm gonna screw up her last name, but it's Mbolo Blue, I think is her name. Those were the last three books that I read.
Very good. I'm just writing those in. Is it also possible to share anything about?
Oh, and also, another book, and I didn't just read it, but one that I read this year that I think readers would love is Crow Mary by Kathleen Grisham, which was fantastic. She's an amazing writer.
I was going to ask, are you able to share anything about what you're writing next?
Well, what I can say is that it's still early. I'm still early with it. I am writing another historical. It takes place probably late 1940s through maybe mid 1960s. I have discovered another woman in history that I think has made a great contribution and has not, people don't know who she is. And so at the heart of the story, I want to tell her story. But similarly, the way I did in the House of Eve, I want to tell other stories at the same time and sort of braid them together to make one complete story. So right now, it feels like I am writing from three different characters' point of views and pulling them all together.
Sounds very intriguing. Oh, is there anything that you could share about the book that didn't make the book that maybe you'd find interesting?
That was literally in the 90s. I don't even remember. You mean the first book that I started writing?
I'm sorry, House of Eve.
Oh.
Like that, I'm sorry.
Oh, give me your question again. I'm sorry.
Yes. Is there anything that you find surprising that wasn't included, or just something that wasn't included we find interesting about in the House of Eve?
So things that just in my research of it, I discovered a lot of fascinating people and places. One person that is actually in the book, and this is not a spoiler, that I discovered was Dorothy Porter Wesley. And Dorothy Porter appears in the book as herself. She was an archivist and a librarian at Howard University. She she amassed the largest collection of African American literature, artifacts, poetry, letters, records, everything, and over a 40-year time period. She called it her collection. She was also known as the shopping bag lady because she was known to go into people's basements and attics. And she said that she would find treasures that the untrained eye would think is trash. She also had a problem with the Dewey Decimal System because there was only two classifications for anything that had to do with Black people. It was slavery and colonization. And one of my favorite lines in the book is Dewey Decimal System be damned, because she changed it to expand it to give life to the whole entire experience. So she was a hero, a woman who, again, I don't think a lot of people knew who she was. And once I discovered her, I knew that she needed to be in my book.
Oh, that's wonderful. That, as I said, I love any shout out to librarians, and she sounded like a really fascinating woman. So yeah, so I'm glad that we learned a lot about her. At this point, I want to open up any viewers that want to ask a question. Again, you could just use the raise your hand icon on there, and then I will pick you and unmute you, and then you can ask your question. Okay, you see who has questions? Okay, Susan Ryder has a question, so you can go off mute and ask.
Thank you. First of all, I have to say your perseverance is amazing. What you went through to get your book, I think it's fantastic. Your husband sounds fantastic. It's so nice to hear a story like that. Coincidentally, right now I'm listening to Yellow Wife, and I'm really loving it, and I recommend it very highly, the audiobook version, because you feel like you're there. And I'm learning so much. So I want to thank you. It's just I'm listening to it slowly so I don't miss any. And I think you're terrific. You're an amazing woman. Now, thank you for coming tonight. One other question. Do you keep an email list? I ask authors, I like this question. Do you keep a list of email addresses of people that want to know about your forthcoming books? In other words, could you let us know if we gave you our email address, which other one, like Fiona Davis does it, so that we know pretty quickly when your book is going to be available?
Yeah, so I have a newsletter that so I'm gonna put my web address in the chat, and
thank you.
It's just my first name is Sadeqa.net, and you can go to my website.
.net. Okay.
I put it in the chat. You can go to my website, and there's going to be a drop down bar that says subscribe to my newsletter, and that way you'll be the ones that know when I'm on book tour, when my books come out, that sort of thing.
What made you pick because I read The House of Eve and then Yellow, I don't know which was first, but the themes were so different, so to speak.
Yeah, The House of Eve was really inspired by my grandmother. Did I say this already? Did I tell you a little bit about? Okay, you guys are my fourth. No, did I not? Okay, because this is my fourth book club today, so now it's all starting to mesh in my head. What I said. So I didn't tell you guys I didn't tell you about my grandmother yet, right? No. Okay. No. So The House of Eve was inspired by my grandmother, and she got pregnant with my mom at 14 and had her 15. I told you that, right? So that was the inspiration for The House of Eve was I wanted to know what options she had, and I wanted to visualize her as Ruby going through life and actually turning out well. That was really what it was. I wanted to give her a second chance, and that's what I did with The House of Eve.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Keep on writing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, the next question is from Marilyn. If you ask your question, thank you.
Before I ask my question, I just wanted to say that in Little Rock, Arkansas, there is a Florence Crittenden home. It is on the National Historic Register, 1918. And one of my roommates in college came to college, not as a starting fall freshman, but joined us later. And she had been in the Florence Crittenden home having a child and giving it up for adoption. So she never talked about it. I don't have any, information from her about that. I'm surprised I even knew, but you know how the rumor mills are. You can't come from a small place like Arkansas. Everybody knows everything. So anyway, just thought I'd share that. My question is, and I don't know exactly how to ask this, but Ruby's boyfriend is Jewish. And how did you go about deciding to have a Jewish boyfriend for her? I'm not from that part of the country, so it may have been very natural because I know he had a store, or his grandfather had a store, or his father had a store. So it may have just been, but how did you decide to go that way?
Thank you. That's a very good question. So in my life, my grandmother and my grandfather didn't marry in the 1950s. My grandfather was very light-skinned and he lived on one side of North Philadelphia. And my grandmother was mahogany brown and she lived on the other side. And so like oil and water in the Black community, they were not intended to mix. The families, my grandfather's family did not want him marrying her. So that's why she was sort of left off on her own. And he actually went off and married someone else. So as I was writing the story of Ruby, I always talk it out with my daughters, picking them up from, soccer or whatever in the car. And so I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking about making Ruby's boyfriend really light-skinned. And my daughter, she was 15 at the time. She's like, Mommy, she's like, make him Italian, up the ante, make him Italian. But I had already known at that point that the story was going to take place in North Philadelphia and that I needed to make it historically accurate of who actually lived in North Philadelphia. And so when I researched it and talked to my mom, it was Jewish people who lived side by side with the African-American community. And they did interact through goods and commerce. And so it made sense that if it was going to be someone outside of her race, it would be someone who lived in close proximity. And that's how Shimmy was born.
Thank you, Marilyn. I have a question from Barbara in the chat. She asked, did you always want to be a writer? And was there someone, like an author or teacher, that inspired you to become a writer?
I did not always want to be a writer. I think when I was younger, I really wanted to be an actress. I really wanted to be on the Cosby Show. I wanted to be Denise's friend or Vanessa's friend on the Cosby Show. I went to college as a theater major, and I didn't go to college to actually graduate. I went to college in New York City because there was a character on the Cosby Show, Erica Alexander, who went to NYU, and she went for 2 weeks and she was discovered, and then she became a member on the Cosby Show, and then her career took off. So that was my thought. I would just be in school for, 2 or 3 weeks. I would get discovered, and then the rest would be, history. Well, that didn't happen. I stayed and graduated. I even switched my major from theater to communications, and then that's how I got into publishing. But I always loved reading and writing. And so it was a natural progression for me.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Either for the chat or over here, if you'd like to ask, please. Okay, Judith, you'd like to ask your question, please?
Well, I want to start with just some comments because I identified so much with your book, Sadeqa. I am a product of the 50s, and it was like I read it in 2 days, a couple of hours in 2 days, because it was like I was going back into early part of my own life, as a young person growing up in a city where you had people catcalling you, that aspect of it, the struggles of the women. I know people who've gone through those kinds of struggles, the historical figures that you folded into your story. These are people who are, I've read Zora Neale Hurston, Charles Drew, the doctor, the elite families of DC, I'm aware of them. So it was just a great book to see how your imagination brought all these characters together and made for such a beautiful book. So I start with that. But my question is, and I don't know if I really have the right to ask, but you seem to have to be motivated a lot by spiritual things, like how you said you felt like you had to leave home, and you felt a spirit that told you leave home, and you did. You followed that spirit, and you went to live in Virginia, and you ended up on the trail, and the trail led you to begin to explore an aspect of history, which now has you on a groove, writing historical novels. So I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit about these spiritual motivations.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. Yes. Wow. I'm so glad that you could relate to the book, and that I was accurate, because obviously I was born in the 70s, right? And so I had to really do a lot of research and be patient for the story to flow through me. I do believe that I'm just a conduit for stories, and that stories choose the author, and that they come through you, and that I have to kind of get out of the way of the characters. Like, I could sketch it and have an idea of how the story is supposed to be, but I also have to make space for the character to tell me how it's supposed to be. I do consider myself pretty spiritual. I start every day with prayer and meditation. I've been meditating. My daughter is 17, so I think I started maybe about 16 years ago with meditation, and I try and do that 15 minutes a day, just so that I believe that prayer is asking God, right? And meditation is sort of listening. And I try to honor when I have those little feelings of you should do this or you should do that, because oftentimes I know that spirit leading me in the right direction.
Thank
Okay,
you. Thank you very much.
thank you, Judith. And Sharon, ask your question, please.
Yes, hi. I really, really enjoyed the book, so I just wanted to start with that. And the amount of research that you did to put into it, I could tell that. And I'm glad you answered what you just answered, because I was wondering about your age and then going back to that time, and how you did that, because I thought it was really good. I have to say I was, I don't know if it was pleasantly surprised. I don't know how to word it, but I kept expecting the guys to not hold their end up, the two, and we have some examples of where that happened, like prior. But I really appreciated that you may not have worked out in I don't want to do spoilers, but but they seemed a little bit more rounded than they could have been. So I did appreciate that. And it actually surprised me, because I kept waiting for it to go another way. And and then also the whole thing about and again, I don't know if this is a spoiler or not. So Michelle, you'll have to stop me. But the whole thing of where, if you're pregnant out of wedlock, if you have a child and you went away, and what happened in some of those places. I was not aware of that, but I read another book recently with a very different theme, but something about Jane. I asked for Jane, maybe, or something.
I just got that book. Is it called All You Have to Do Is Call?
Yeah, something like that. Or call. Yeah, that's not quite the title, but the title has, I think it has
Call
Jane in
my
the title.
name? Is it You Can Call My Name?
You know what? I'm
Wait, I
not
think
sure,
I
but
have it right here. This is it. This one?
Oh, that's it. It is full. That's it.
what's the name of the author?
Her name is Carrie Mayer.
No, there must be a few of them out now.
Oh, okay.
So, but
Yeah, because she just sent this to me in the mail, and she said that we had similar themes.
yeah,
Well, I'm gonna read it. So
yeah, there might be a few. I think it has Jane in the title, and it's by a Canadian author.
In the chat, someone says it's called Looking for Jane. We don't know the author, but maybe it's called Looking for Jane.
Looking for Jane.
okay,
Yes.
okay,
It's a code
okay.
word.
It's
And,
a similar
yeah.
topic or something. Maybe
Uh,
to the two books. Mhm.
yeah, so I don't really have a question on it other than I thought you did a phenomenal job with it and it really touched me. And I belong to a couple of book clubs and I'm definitely recommending it for my other.
Oh,
So
thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Okay, Maria, you'll have the last question.
Debbie has a question also. Mike, how do you go about choosing what names to give your characters? Is it friends or, and also after you're done with their writing, like when your book is complete, do you plan something special for you and your family to go away, or what do you do to celebrate?
That's a good question. So Ruby was named after, so my grandmother, who I've mentioned, she used to live where she lived in Philadelphia. There was a woman who lived next door and her name was Miss Ruby. We called her Miss Ruby. And I thought that she was so eloquent. She was so elegant. She carried herself well and she always wore like pretty jewelry. And I grew up in Philadelphia, but for whatever reason, this was a block of row houses. She was one of the only houses that had a porch, which, so she just seemed so, glamorous to me. And so she just always stayed in my head. And so Ruby was a natural fit for her. For Eleanor and for a lot of the other names in the book, for the House of Eve, I usually Google the Social Security list for the years that I think that the characters were born in. And I look at the popular names of boys and girls during the time that I'm writing in so that it feels authentic. So Eleanor was one of those names. Nadine actually was an aunt of mine who, as I was writing the book, had passed away. And I wanted to give her, to me, when I name a character after, or I'm thinking about a family member, I'm giving them a new life. So my Aunt Nadine died in her 50s or 60s, so it was pretty early. And I thought I can give her a whole new life as this Nadine, in my book. And William was my grandfather. So I mix it up. So I name them sometimes after people, and then sometimes I'll do the list. For Yellow Wife, though, I researched actual slave ledgers that the plantation owners kept. And I would look at those records and take names off of the ledgers, because again, that was another way of me bringing those characters, those people back to life through my story.
And what do you celebrate?
So what do I do to celebrate? Goodness gracious, I definitely need to do a little bit more. But I will like treat myself to the spa or a really good dinner. Not a full vacation though. So you got me thinking that I need to have like a whole weekend vacation or something. Yes. So I'm gonna do better. I'm gonna remember this. So when I finish the one I'm working on, it's gonna be something good.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I love the book. I did the
Thank
audio.
you.
The audio was awesome.
Thank you.
Oh, so quickly, Debbie, you can just quickly ask your question and then we will.
Okay.
Thank you.
Debbie?
I'm unmuting. I just want to say hi again and thanks so much. And I just love following your work and all that you do. And I have been searching up and down just to continue reading on this topic. And the one that we were talking about before that Sharon, I think, mentioned, it's Looking for Jane by Heather Marshall, along with Take My Hand. And
Take My Hand was amazing.
Another one. And then in my book club did like a compare contrast on several, including the House of Eve. Just going to say P.S. the House of Eve one is the best written of the topic. And then we also read Only the Beautiful by Susan Meisner. So
Oh,
which
I
is
love
which
Susan.
is a little bit, it's slightly a little bit different time frame, but and a little bit on a different topic because it was California eugenics, but it's still the same thing with these unwed mothers and controlling with sterilization. It's just
Yeah.
absolutely amazing with taking people's babies and thinking that that is okay. And I'm just so proud that you wrote this story and that we have it out there and we're continuing to educate ourselves
Thank
on, you know, what was so wrong that we can now make right.
Yeah. Thank you. Well said. Well said. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Thank you so much, Sadeqa, for doing this virtual author visit with us. And I really enjoyed interviewing you and learned so much. And I'm sure our attendees felt the same way. And I hope the attendees will either come to the library to check out this book or any of your other books, and also or buy at your favorite bookstore. And I hope you join us next month when I interview Karini Shroff on Thursday, October 12th at 7 p.m. to talk about her debut novel, The Bandit Queens. And Sadeqa, I hope you have a wonderful evening. And thanks again.
Thank you. And I put my website in the chat again. It's sadeqa.net. Just go online and subscribe to my newsletter so we can keep in touch. And I also put my Instagram. So thank you so much for having me. And you guys have a fantastic evening.
You too. Thanks again.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good night. Thank you for attending, and I hope you enjoyed.
Thanks, Michelle. Good job as always.
you,
Thank
Michelle.
you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye, everybody.
Welcome. Have a
Bye,
good
Thank you, Michelle.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good
Bye,
night,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye, everyone. Great evening.
Bye.
Thank